All right, just a little test. Can everyone in the back hear me? That looks good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin in just a few moments. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, August 10th, 2021. The time is 5 p.m. We are opening the session of our special meeting, the following of which will now come to order. The Victorville City Council and the same council also sitting as the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the City as Housing Asset Successor, Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Deputy Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Becerra.
Here.
Councilmember Gomez.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Irby.
Present.
Mayor Jones.
Here. Thank you. We have a quorum. All right. Do we have Pastor Paul Gustanian with us? Or is he online?
I don't see him on Zoom.
Pastor Paul Gustania for the High Desert Church? Not on Zoom? All right, with that said, we have two options for our invocation. That would be Mayor Pro Tem Leslie Irving or the chair. Mayor Pro Tem, what is your pleasure? Yes, you would. All right. So after the chair leads us in our invocation, we're going to do the pledge to our wonderful American flag by Police Captain Wickham. All right, so if everyone will please stand. Heavenly Father, we come to you with gratefulness in our heart that we can even come to you and that you're always with us and you know our inmost being, you know our every thought, and you know every tear that we shed, even when other people don't see it. We thank you for being for us. We thank you for providing a way for us to be one of your children and to walk alongside you with a joyness in our heart. We ask that you would be with us and give us the wisdom that we need to carry out this meeting tonight. We love you, we adore you, and we thank you in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Captain Wickham.
Please face the flag and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Captain Wickham. All right, Madam Deputy Clerk, will you kindly present the agenda and any revisions thereto?
There are no revisions.
Thank you. And so council members, at this time, do you have any conflicts of interest to declare? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to move on to the introduction to public comments. But before I do that, Madam Deputy Clerk, are there any requests to speak?
I do not have any speaker cards.
I'm one of the speakers that would like to speak.
Okay, certainly. So Member Gomez would like to speak as an audience member, and as this is a special meeting, we're commenting on special meeting items only. If you'll proceed to the podium, we're happy to hear from you as a member of the audience. Welcome, Ms. Gomez.
Yes, so during public comment, we have the freedom of speech to speak on what is happening. Unfortunately, the city of Victorville's FBI currently has an investigation in the sheriff's police department, and it's an open case.
Ms. Gomez, one
It's-
moment.
sure.
Thank you so much. We're speaking on the items posted on our agenda this evening. So do you wish to speak to item number 3?
So are you prohibiting from speaking during public comment?
Certainly not, but on special
Okay.
meetings, we speak only to those items posted. Mr. DeBortnowski, would you care to weigh in?
Would you be able to cite that policy as well?
We're not going to do that. The
Okay.
audience member is a council member and is quite familiar with policy.
I'm
Mr.
not, that's what I'm
DeBortnowski,
asking.
member has been a council member for 5 years. Mr. DeBortnowski,
Please
Certainly,
cite the policy, I appreciate it.
we're not going to do that. Ms. Gomez?
certainly, actually, the Brown Act does provide that with respect to special meetings, that the comments, public comments related to special meetings should be limited to the items that are on the special meeting agenda. That's part of the Brown Act.
Okay, well, I'm going to continue. As I was stated, there's an open case against the county of San Bernardino.
So Ms. Gomez,
Yes.
which item would you care to speak to this?
So
this
during
evening?
public comment,
On
would I-
item number 3 is what would be available other than if you would like to
So
speak on public hearing items.
I would like to speak during public comment about issues that are affecting the city of Victorville with
So
the
the-
county sheriff's.
Sure, thank
department.
you. However, that's not posted on the agenda this evening, so I'm going to
So
ask
it
you to
needs to be
proceed.
posted? Is that what you're saying? It needs to be posted?
So agenda item number 3 is the one that would be available to comment on right now, and that's the workshop and presentation for effective city
Okay,
leadership.
so then you're saying that as a public commenter, I cannot speak on anything outside of that?
During
Is that-
special meetings, that's what the Brown Act provides, yes.
Okay, I didn't hear the Brown Act where it said that. I thought I had a First Amendment right to be able to comment on anything. on
Again,
any
I'll
ground.
defer to Mr. DeBortnowski, Ms.
Okay,
Gomez.
Thank you, appreciate it.
It's section 54954.3A.
Okay, I will be reading that. I appreciate it. If you can write it on a little piece of note, and I will continue the public comment if you want.
As long as it relates to item number 3,
Yeah, and
certainly.
if you wish to turn off my mic, that's your prerogative. But like I said, there's a lot of issues.
Thank you, Ms.
happening
Gomez.
in
I
the
would
city of
never wish to
Victorville,
do
And
that.
that's very, very pertinent to what's going on. And
As
a
long as
council
it's
member-
related to item number 3,
Yes,
Ms.
and as a
Gomez.
council member, I like to know our community that we're not in a safe environment. So we need to start checking up on what's happening in the city of Victorville. We don't feel protected
So
and
Ms.
we're not
Gomez, I
being protected. So that's the
I
end of my
don't
comment.
know that this
I
relates to item
appreciate that
3.
you let me finish it, and I'm going to go have a seat now. Thank you.
You bet, Ms. Gomez, and thank you very much for your comments. All right, Madam Deputy Clerk, any other requests to speak?
Basil Kimbrough.
Mr. Kimbrough, welcome.
I don't know if this is the right time to speak. I
So-
don't want to speak on anything.
So we
particular.
have, it's a little different this evening, Mr. Kimbrough, because it's a special meeting. So, and Madam Deputy Clerk, that this time isn't held against the member while I'm speaking, of course. So for special meetings, we're only going to address those items that are specifically posted on the agenda. So we have 2 public hearings, and if you want to speak on those, you can speak during those particular items. But if you wish to speak on item number 3, which is the workshop and presentation for effective city leadership, you're certainly welcome to do so, and we would invite that.
Then I'll wait till next week because I had something particular I really want to speak on.
I'm so sorry.
Then I have to wait till next council meeting. 'Cause I had something.
If you don't believe that it falls within item number 3, that would be recommended, certainly.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. Any other requests?
I have one via Zoom, Galaxy A12. Please unmute.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, and who do we have on the line?
This is Maggie Martin.
Good evening, Ms. Martin, and welcome. Which item do you wish to speak to? Presuming it's
The-
item number 3?
It is. It
Thank
is.
you.
And
Thank
can you tell me the name of that exactly again, Your Honor?
Sure, the title of it is Workshop and Presentation for Effective City Leadership.
Okay, we really need that. There's a member on the council who really needs to participate openly and without defiance in weighing in on that item. Has already been demonstrated here tonight. And that's really all I wanted to say, Your Honor, is there's a problem. There's a problem there, and that person needs the information from that agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Those are all the speakers.
Thank you. So the chair brings this item back to the council. Public comment period is now closed. The Street Lighting Assessment District confirming the annual assessments for fiscal year 21-22. Mr. Metzler, will you kindly tee up the item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Yes, this item is something that we attend to annually as we go through the process of determining the continued appropriateness of having the street lighting assessment district in place. And then, of course, if it is believed necessary, then, of course, determining the appropriate cost to maintain the system for the next year. In our particular case, for the City of Victorville, Street Lighting Assessment District is covering, of course, the street lamps that illuminate the streets, but also do comprise your signalization throughout the city as well. So basically the electricity costs and some capital associated with those 2 items. With that, this item is brought for your consideration in this particular case, and as considered when we went through the budget process, this item does carry forward an increase over the previous year of about 10%, which actually amounts to $1.40. So in the totality, not a significant amount, but it is important to note that this is the first time in the 8-year existence that the Street Lighting Assessment District has been in place that staff is recommending a rate increase. Again, this rate increase was contemplated as a part of your budget assumptions, and therefore approving this item tonight would allow the city to achieve its revenue targets that are budgeted. This item is authored by your city engineer, Mr. Brian Gengler, who's in the back of the audience. He's available for any technical questions or comments you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Deputy Clerk, will you kindly read the recommendation?
That the city council adopt resolution number 21-074, confirming the annual assessments for fiscal year 2021 through 2022, and approve the engineer's report for the citywide street lighting assessment district.
Thank you very much. So now the chair opens us up to technical questions for clarification as it relates to the staff report on the agenda item. We're going to begin with Member Becerra.
No questions, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Gomez.
Yes, what's the process update on the street lighting for the city, specifically for Old Town?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I know we have been working with SoCal Edison. I know we've made progress. both in installing lamps in the alleyways and at the intersections of the alleyways with the streets. But if appropriate, we'd be better served getting an answer from our city engineer, Mr. Gangler, as he's dealing with that on the more daily basis.
Good evening, Mr. Gangler.
Thank you. So in this fiscal year, we budgeted $100,000 for street lighting in Old Town. So that is a planned expense. And we have been working with Southern California Edison to actually upgrade streetlights on 7th Street. That's the part between Forest and D Street. And then also on D Street between I-15 and 11th. So I don't have an update on the timing of that, but we have at least planned for that expense for this fiscal year.
Thank you. And what prompted the 10% and not, for example, a 3% increase?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What prompted the 10% and not, for example, a 3% increase?
Well, are you asking what justifies the 10% increase? Okay.
Yes.
So it basically was a projection of the planned revenue and planned expenses that were in our budget. And to sustain the planned expenses, we're going to need a 10% increase in the assessment, which would increase that portion of the revenue to cover our expenses, because there are several planned expenses for operations and maintenance, and there are some capital expenses as well. So it's all consistent with what was in the approved budget.
Okay. You said it was in coordination with what just was approved in the budget.
Yes.
And how does the decrease in cash balance affect tonight's appropriation?
It really doesn't. The only action we're requesting tonight is the adoption of the resolution and the approval of the engineer's report. There's no action necessary on the budget because that was already approved.
And what could occur if there was a delay in the appropriation in tonight's place? And if we were to move it, for example, where there's more civic engagement and more participation from the public?
Well, we're not requesting an appropriation tonight. We're simply requesting the approval of the assessments for this coming year.
Okay, so it's my understanding when we're asking to approve the citywide street lighting district and the adoption of the resolution, the fiscal impact of about 3.1 million would require at least some more participation from the public. And that's why my question was, as it was, if we were to delay for more participation, what would the impact be?
Well, we have a deadline to submit our assessment roll. Actually, we need to submit it tomorrow to the tax collector. So the impact would be that it could delay these assessments going on the roll, the tax roll.
Thank you. And how has the community been updated besides tonight's agenda item?
The community has been updated by the regular budget process and also the notice of this meeting.
And do we know why this item didn't appear in June's budget appropriation, or is this just an extension?
Typically, we follow the approval of the budget for these annual confirmations of assessments.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Well, typically you would see an item such as this after the approval of the budget in June. We would follow up with this later, typically.
Okay, so just for my understanding and for the sake of clarity for the audience members that are watching. So in essence, the first time we had this, it was a hearing, and tonight is something that's a follow-up that's necessary for the standard procedures of what it requires. Is that something, or you can clarify?
For an annual confirmation of an assessment district like this, we only need to seek approval of city council just once during the year.
Okay, so that once that was approved, wasn't that during the hearing? And why is it showing up tonight then?
Well, this is the time. This is the one time that we are requesting the approval for this confirmation of the assessments.
Okay, so this is the first time that we're seeing it.
Yes.
Okay, so when I asked how many times or how did we, besides tonight's agenda, I thought I heard you said there was an initiation prior, and this was something because of timing we needed to bring back. And so that's why my question was, how many times did we notify the public?
This is the first time.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
You're welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
No, I don't have any questions, but I would like for you to reiterate, this is a part of a budget assumption, correct? And the increase is only $1.40, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Pro Tem, and that was the exact question that I was going to ask. So this was a part of our budget workshop. It was one of the assumptions. And so the council has already been familiar with this information. Thank you, Mr. Gangler.
If I might, just so that the council is clear, this is the first time that we're dealing with it as to this confirmation, but this is not a new subject. In fact, this LMAD was put in place back in 2013. And when it was imposed back in 2013, it was actually imposed with a much more exhaustive process. It actually, pursuant to Prop 218, was required to go out to a mailed vote of the property owners in the city. So I don't want to have the impression left that this is the first time, surprise, gotcha, that this item is on the agenda, because it was a much more exhaustive public inclusion process back when we first formed it. And so since that time, we've been carrying forward with the public hearing process to reaffirm the assessments.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler. All right, with that said, we're going to move on to the public hearing. The chair opens the public hearing. Madam Deputy Clerk, are there any requests to speak from the members of the audience?
I have no speaker cards. Oh, it looks like we have someone from the audience.
This is on the public hearing item number 1. So we have a speaker filling out a card at this moment. It looks like we have another one approaching to fill out another card.
Diana?
Yes, so the clerk recognizes Miss Diana. Welcome to our meeting.
Thank you so much, and thank you for recognizing me to speak. I come from Adelanto, and there's a lot of construction on Palmdale right now. So I ran down here, excuse me. So while we talk tonight about raising the lighting infrastructure rates approximately $15 per year per household, it's in the paperwork, to the households and businesses to keep the city coffers comfortable, I believe that the raises in prices to residents, while the federal government is releasing trillions of dollars in funds to local municipalities just like this, why aren't those funds used for this purpose instead of raising the prices to the constituent, the voter, the resident? I believe that the increases are like an equivalent to about an hour's worth of work for the common resident. So you're asking people to pay more just so that you can make up for the $500,000 approximately that will be taken this time from this budget that's missing basically. My suggestion would be that we find another way to gain those resources that you need for these fundings, such as slashing the political emoluments for the golf course, effectively appropriating the $33 million in funds from the federal government to best serve the needs of the residents, and start to question business deals with SCLA and prior and present members of this body. Thank you. But I would like to say that there are monies other places that could be appropriated, and I ask that this council amend this to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Diana. Madam Deputy Clerk.
Valentin Godina?
Mr. Godina, welcome.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. I'd like to know why there's no mention of Old Town in this lighting resolution. When you were just a council member, Mayor, you were in Old Town and you promised Old Town that they would have lighting. There was $2 million set aside for Old Town lighting almost, 4 years ago? And we haven't seen a nickel of that in lighting out there. We've seen a few light bulbs changed, but nowhere near the $2 million that was promised. When I came and asked the engineer what was going on, he was very upset at me for asking. And we had a very unpleasant conversation after that. So I see that in this agenda, nothing is mentioned about the $2 million for lighting that was supposed to go to Old Town. Where is the $2 million and where's the light bulbs for Old Town? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godina, and my apologies if you in any way felt uncomfortable with one of the city employees. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Those are all the speakers.
Thank you. So with that said, the chair closes the public hearing and brings this item back to the council and invites a motion of the Victorville City Council.
Madam Mayor, motion to approve
Staff's
staff
recommendation.
recommendation. I'm just gonna.
I'd like to add a substitute motion to amend this motion to reflect where monies would be coming from, which are other revenue sources. That's my motion.
So one moment, just for clarification. So Member Gomez, do you wish to make a substitute motion or amend the motion?
So I would like to amend the motion to reflect where the monies can come from. Other revenue sources is a possibility.
Thank you. So is there a request on the proposed amendment to add it to the main motion? Hearing no second, the request for the amendment dies. We're back to the main motion.
I'd like to second the main motion.
Thank you. We have a second by Mayor Pro Tem Irving. And we're now going to move on to discussion on the pending motion, beginning with the maker of the motion, Member Becerra.
Yes, Mr. Metzler, our books are open to the public, correct?
Yes, they are.
Um,
They are
anytime-
also audited independently on an annual basis.
Okay, so if we need to see 6 months from now what we've collected, we can ask and it can be presented.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, so thank you, Members Becerra. And this is typically the time when we have comments on the pending motion, but there are those occasions when it's important to ask follow-up questions that would be helpful to your colleagues. And so we thank you for that. Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
No comments or questions.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
Yes, the increases aren't meritorious in tonight's special 24-hour meeting. It does not represent the democracy or the transparency of inclusion of an extra cost of 10% with such populations having 24-hour notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez. Chair has no comments on the
welcome.
pending motion. Discussion period's closed. Madam Deputy Clerk, will you kindly take the vote?
Councilmember Becerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Gomez,
Nay.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye.
That motion passes with Councilmember Gomez voting no.
Thank you kindly. So the council has just taken action in accordance with the recommendation laid out on the agenda. We're now going to move to item number 2, and this is the annual confirmation of maintenance assessments districts. Mr. Metzler, will you tee up the item, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Similar to the last item, but dealing with a different nature of assessment districts. We are here asking for approval and recommending approval to confirm the assessments for landscape maintenance assessment districts. We commonly refer to those as LMADs. There's about 7 of those throughout the community. We also have 3 DFADs, as we call them. They're drainage facility assessment districts, and then 2 MADs, maintenance assessment districts. This item is dealing with all of those collectively. Among all of those districts, there are recommendations in 2 LMADs, 2 DFADs, and 1 MAD to increase those rates approximately 3.04%. And I believe that's to be consistent with inflationary costs in those areas. Those are also LMADs that have prescribed in them the ability to increase those rates. And of course, those increases are all based upon a cost of service analysis to determine the revenue necessary to keep those assessment districts operational. So with that, the author on this item again is your city engineer, Mr. Brian Gangler. He's available for any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Deputy Clerk, will you kindly read the recommendation?
That the city council adopt resolution numbers 21-075 through 21-088, confirming the annual assessments for landscape maintenance assessment districts 1 through 8, drainage facility assessment districts 1 through 3, and Maintenance Assessment Districts 1 through 3, and approve the respective engineers' reports for Landscape Maintenance Assessment Districts 1 through 8, Drainage Facility Assessment Districts 1 through 3, and Maintenance Assessment Districts 1 through 3.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. Now going to move on to technical questions for clarification purposes as it relates to the staff report on this agenda item. And we're going to begin with Member Gomez.
Is this LMAD an extension of this year's LMAD appropriation? And if so, did we see that in the budget appropriations in June?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Yes, in fact, the budget that we did approve did include assumptions consistent with what's in the staff report being recommended before you tonight.
How does the LMAD's additional appropriations affect the cost of living increases if tonight's item were to have a fiscal impact?
I don't see them affecting cost of living. More so, I see the cost of living or the inflationary costs affecting the assessment districts, and therefore that's a large part of the reason for the recommendation for the increases.
Since you said something about the budget assumptions, is this now actual or is it still considered a formulaic assumption?
The budget assumption was an assumption up until the point in time where the council approved the budget. It depends upon this action. This action makes it more realistic that you'll actually achieve those revenue collections over the course of the next year.
And how does the engineer's report or supplement of tonight's annual confirmation indeed add to today's costs that are enumerated on different assessment per unit budgets? I'm going to consider them budgets. They may be accounts in the summary.
Yes, if I might, Madam Mayor and members of the council, the engineer's report effectively is the validation that's required to where the cost of service basically is done. And in some of the cases of our utilities, you're probably more familiar with a much more elaborate cost of service study. In this particular case, that's not exactly required, but the city engineer's report effectively serves that same purpose to where the actual costs are actually analyzed, determined just, and then with that, a rate is calculated from that assessment of costs.
Thank you. And does the engineer's report gain access to public opinion or thought in its summation?
It's likely possible, but that's not exactly the place for this document. Actually, this document is much more focused on actual cost of service.
And what's the approximate cost incurred by taxpayers for such an approval, or its approximation? I don't see dollar figures per se per unit. I only see the assessment per benefit.
Yeah, if I might, I'd point you to the tables in page 58 and 59. And I point you in that direction because the rates vary based upon the district to which one is located in, and of course, the benefit a unit attached to it.
And when considering the variations or the varies of the units, do we also consider the different usage, or like street lighting? It's an analogy. What we do is we'll charge a certain percentage or 100% with the light coming in, for instance. So in this regard, the same thing is, are we using 100% of the individuals who are within that area to consume, the beauty or the aesthetic beauty that this provides, or is it prorated? Is it based on a scale? How do you manage that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. We actually analyze the total actual cost for the district. And then, of course, we spread that cost out over those 100% of those property owners that are getting the special benefit.
Thank you. And formulaically, how are the assessments per benefits costs do they go to administrative costs, maintenance and operation? And do we include any external costs such as voluntary, anything else that would not be explicit in this document?
Voluntary doesn't necessarily connote an actual cost, but to the extent there's actual costs, such as admin, such as operational costs, those would all be included as a factor.
So they are divvied up in different categories, maintenance versus administrative costs and then external costs and so forth.
Yes.
Would you please
And is that-
take me to the page number where that can be found?
All of it would be comprised in the respective engineers' reports. So out of the respect for time, I'm finding one immediately on page 104. That would be an example, and there are others like that throughout this document that you can likely identify to relate to each of the respective assessment districts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez. Mayor Pro Tem Irving?
You're welcome.
In my view, this item is very much like item 1. I don't have any technical questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Becerra?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. Mr. Metzler, the LMADs and the DFADs and the MADs, they're not put in after the house is built, correct? When someone buys a house with an LMAD and a DFAD around it, it's already up and running when I choose to go in and buy a house in that area?
That is correct. And maybe just to kind of bookend that conversation, we're this item, for example, we're seeing now on the very back end where now you have residents that have actually moved into homes where these assessment districts take place. This council is very used to seeing, especially as we're a growing city and especially as new tracts are being developed and there are conditions of approval to put in place LMADs, maintenance assessment district, that effectively would be the bookend. So yeah, it starts with that process that I just laid out where the developer initiates the request for the assessment. If approved, the assessment gets recorded on the property. Every individual, every buyer of a home or a buyer of a property within assessment district will find a mention of this and have all of the access to all of the related documents per the recordation that's typically found in a preliminary title report or the actual title report.
Thank you. Also, if I choose to rent a home in that area, that's between me and the homeowner, correct? Of how they raise the rates or my rental for these homes because the assessment district is going up.
That's completely a private party transaction.
We don't have any control over, we have only control over the outside area maintenance, none on the properties, none everything to do with that, just the LMADs, the DFADs and the MADs, correct?
Right. Our responsibility would be typically within what's considered public ownership or even public right of way.
And we do make sure that the planning in those areas is correct and water conservation and things like that. So it is the cheapest possible to get those landscaped.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. No further questions.
Thank you, Member Becerra. The chair just has a couple of questions. So my understanding is that these are all set up in line with Proposition 218, correct?
That is correct.
So, and this is in effect a procedural exercise conducted annually.
At this point, that is correct.
Council members are familiar with. Typically.
You can
That's
speak for yourself.
Member Gomez did
You're
not have the
welcome.
floor. Mr. Metzler,
That is correct.
thank you very much. Right chair has no further questions. And opens the public hearing. Madam Deputy Clerk, are there any requests to speak?
I have no speaker cards and no one on Zoom.
Thank you.
Oh.
Okay, so
It's not mandatory.
Ms. Diana, you're welcome to fill out a card. You're welcome to speak, but our procedure is that on public hearing items, that the request be made prior to the public hearing item be announced, but certainly the council would wish to hear from you. Please step forward.
Thank you so much for your direction, Mayor Jones. I appreciate you. I also appreciate City Manager Metzler for answering those questions and being so patient. Not all of us have a master's working on doctorate's degrees in political science, so I really appreciate that. it was so interesting to me as a student and also as a resident to hear your detailed and intricate answers to those really important questions. I had them. I didn't even know I had them until she asked them. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And then your answers were so awesome too. So thank you for that. And I would just like to say that even though these are regular procedural votes and things like that, that we are used to, we are not used to the fact that it is a 24-hour notice and a special meeting. So I would have to agree with that maybe we need to think about that and how that came across to the public and how it, might have hurt public participation. So thank you so much for all of the work you do to enact our democracy. It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Ms. Diana. Mr. DeBortnowski, on special meetings, the posting requirement is 24 hours. Did we meet that obligation?
We did, and as a matter of fact, these things were noticed for a prior meeting, which had a notice of cancellation and a direct link to this council meeting. So everybody was given notice. It was anticipated that this would be heard at the prior meeting, which was canceled. In the notice of cancellation, we specifically referenced the special meeting time and place for those people.
Yes, thank you, Mr. DeBortnowski. Madam Deputy Clerk, any further requests?
There are no other speakers.
Thank you. With that said, the chair closes the public hearing and brings the item back to the council, invites a motion from the Victorville City Council.
Mayor, I move to accept staff's recommendation for item 2.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. We have a first and a second. Chair invites discussion on the pending motion, beginning with the maker of the motion, Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
Have any discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Becerra.
Discussion, thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
Yes. Quiero dar gracias por las habla hispanas que han
Member
llegado.
Gomez will
Mil
follow our-
disculpas
is out
porque no hay intérpretes.
Pursuant to our
Perdón.
policy and procedure. Anything further, Member Gomez?
Would you like me to translate?
No, ma'am. I simply was
Nothing
bringing you
further.
to
I
order.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Gomez. All right, and the chair has no comment on the pending motion. The discussion period is now closed. Madam Deputy Clerk, will you kindly take the vote?
Councilmember Becerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Gomez,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye.
That motion passes.
Thank you. So the Victorville City Council has just adopted the recommendation from staff as laid out on the agenda. We're now going to move on to our next business in order, which is written communications, beginning with, and our only item is item number 3, and that's the workshop and presentation for effective city leadership. Mr. Metzler, will you kindly introduce the item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This item is being brought to the attention of the city council resulting from a prior closed session conversation. It has been recommended by legal counsel that the city council participate in a more pointed training to help the council better avoid complaints against it in the future. Accordingly, we've brought to you Mr. Jerry Preciado from 34th Street Consulting to provide that leadership and responsibilities training. I have passed out for you to review and make notes along the way, the actual printed version of the PowerPoint presentation that Mr. Preciado will be giving. So at this point in time, I'd like to invite Mr. Preciado up to the podium.
Thank you. And before you begin, sir, first of all, welcome. But to my colleagues, we do have a hard copy of the presentation that we're about to receive. And so I'm going to let our presenter take this item on, as I think that your style is probably that you're going to ask questions as we proceed through this. As many
Councilwoman
do.
Gomez would like to be recognized for
Member Gomez is
clarification.
not. Member Gomez is not recognized.
I'd
at
like
this
to have a
time.
bit of clarification on what the process is going to be. If you wouldn't mind repeating it for me.
Ms. Gomez, if you hold on, the chair has not offered you recommendation, but I'm recognition, but I'm happy to in just a moment. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Metzler, so I just want to make sure that we're all very clear. So this is a response to a closed session item regarding a complaint from a staff member related to a member on the council. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
And at this point, because it was a closed session conversation, I would recommend that we will limit the description to
Yes,
just that.
Absolutely. So we do need to recognize the confidential nature of closed session. So with that said, welcome, and we're happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
But
Members-
except, I'm so sorry, my apologies. Member Gomez, you wanted to be recognized to ask a question?
I was just wanting to seek clarification as if there's a presentation, comment questions. How would you like to proceed with this? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so at this point, Member Gomez, I'm going to hand this over to Mr. Preciado because this is going to be much like kind of the tone, I'm presuming, as the governance relations workshop that we had in February. And so we're going to just really yield ourselves to the presenter and let him take the lead on this. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. And I will answer that question, Member Gomez, and say, if you have a question, any of you at any point in time, in particular, Madam Mayor and members of the council, please wave me down, speak up, your mics work. Let me know, and I'm happy to answer that for you, truly. There's a bunch of reasons why I'm happy to be here in Victorville tonight. Number one is I have been coming to Victorville for 18 years, going on 19 years now in a variety of capacities, including doing training, loss prevention training, managing litigation, doing a variety of things over the last 18 years. I've grown very fond of this city. I've seen employees come and go, good employees, and who I connected with, and excellent council members, right? This is a delight for me to be here because this is my wheelhouse. Local government, this is where the proverbial rubber of the Constitution meets the road. You are representative government like nowhere else. The Pew Institute did a research study a couple years ago that talked about the level of satisfaction that people have with their elected representatives. You know, they did the national ones, Congress, United States senators, local assembly members, state senators in California. This is a reference to California specifically. And the highest level of satisfaction that people experience in California is with their local government officials because they have access to you. They feel like they're connected to you. They feel like they see you at the grocery store and they know you're in the neighborhood. They know what you said about lighting in Old Town all those years ago, right? And they feel connected to you as a result of that. A member of our meeting today, a member of the public, shared in their comment earlier that they were glad for this subject, and it made me smile because of a particular council member. And I smiled because I'm glad for this subject because it's good for all of us. Everybody present, everybody on the Zoom meeting, to be reminded, right, of the things that we do to ensure that the people's voice is heard. And you're doing that. How you do it is going to be reflected different with every council. There are people that will ask a lot of questions. There are people who will question the established way of doing it. But in the end, the key for your success is to remember where you are, who you represent, and what are the parameters for these discussions. If we really want to represent the people's interests, we must do so as a house of order. It cannot be chaotic and inspire confidence when we get to this point, which means we have to do a lot of work in advance of meetings, not violate any Brown Act, city attorney, right? And have any sort of serial meetings. But what we do is do our homework, ask those questions. And when I find myself at podiums like these, it is for a couple of reasons. One, our Joint Powers Authority has asked me to be here. That's sometimes why I'm there. Other times I'm there because we just want a reminder we're being proactive. And yet other reasons I'm here are for what our good city manager, Mr. Metzler, suggested here today. Regardless of why we're here, why we find ourselves here, it is a good reminder for all of you, and I'm looking specifically now at our council members, to just kind of be reminded of what the context is of what you're doing. There's 120,000 plus people counting on you, right? To do what they elected you to do, to be who they hoped you would be, and ultimately to achieve and move that needle to create the best version of Victorville that we can create. And I believe that this group can do it. For those who are listening and scoffing maybe at home because of some of the chaotic moments we've had, and I've watched hours of Victorville council meetings, literally hours, to get a flavor for this council. Every council has a unique way of going about things. There are some ways that seem in the moment like they're effective and they're not. There are some moments that feel like you're doing the right thing, and because it's driven by passion and the heart and integrity, we feel like we're justified in doing it, and we're not. I'm just here to remind you what those parameters are. I don't love the phrase It's important to stay in your lane because it's used in a derogatory way too often. And it suggests we can't think outside the box, right? But there are real strict lanes in California for Councilmember Gomez, for Mayor Pro Tem Irving, for Mayor Jones, and for Councilmember Becerra to stay in order for you to keep the protections that were designed for you to successfully discharge your duties and responsibilities as a council member. And that's what we're going to be reminded of here today. But it all starts with something that isn't so regulated and isn't so well defined, but I do want to ask, and this is where our Madam Mayor was right, and we turn it over to the presenter to sort of lead the discussion, right, that makes sense. And so here's the question I have for you. What is a leader, right? What I'd like you to think about while I'm unpacking this is think of one quality that you have witnessed, experienced, or had the privilege of serving with in a leader, one characteristic, one quality that you really admired. Maybe you're hoping to emulate, or maybe you've worked to develop over these last many years. So what is a leader? This slide tells us there is no universal definition of a leader, but there are a lot of leadership qualities out there. There's no MBA school out in the country that's going to define for us, hey, here's a test. If you take it and score 17 or higher, you're a leader. That test doesn't exist because leadership changes. Context changes who the leaders are. Sometimes situations, sometimes the people themselves have the leadership thrust upon them, and that causes that change. So as I think about that, and excuse my randomness here and arbitrariness, but Councilmember Becerra, when you think of a leader, what quality or characteristic comes to mind?
Honesty.
Honesty and integrity go hand in hand. They're slightly different, but boy, when we have an honest leader, that speeds up the transaction process because we have confidence in what they say. They do what they say they're going to do. They are who they say they are. And we don't have to worry when we lay our heads on our pillows at night if in fact they're telling us the truth or they're being disingenuous, right? Honesty speeds the process up. You don't have to do as much homework. You don't have to CC your email, ensuring that this person isn't going to double cross you. You don't have to, et cetera, et cetera. Saves a lot of energy. Honesty is a tremendous quality. I think just about everybody puts that quality on their list. Madam Mayor, what do you think of when you think of quality?
Sure. Well, competence, character, and commitment with the understanding that the leader's job is to bring the team or the organization together for a shared, to take forward that shared unity of purpose.
Very good, very good. Competence was the first one. You gave me several there. You're an overachiever, clearly. So I'm going to just stick with competence on that one.
How did he figure me out in 2 minutes? I just want to know.
Competence is a big deal because many times people can, let's say they're going for a job interview, right? And they might pad that resume a little bit. They want to be an associate at the great firm of our city attorney, and they'll pad that resume a little bit. They'll say they've done this and that. Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that. And then when it comes right down to it, when it comes time to perform and discharge their duties, no matter how likable they are, no matter how friendly they are and how much we think they're going to be a great asset culture-wise, if they can't do the job, if they're not competent to discharge those duties and responsibilities, they can't stay. I think competence is clearly one of the priority characteristics of a leader. So thank you for that one. Please, our Mayor Pro Tem.
I think leadership or a leader should have a vision, a visionary that's able to inspire and transform or bring us to something else.
I could not agree with you more on that one. Years ago, I was working at a law firm where it became very evident that the leader of the organization wasn't clear on where we were going. They could talk around it quite a bit. And you don't always think of law firms as, they have a vision like an IBM would or someone like Intel or Amazon, but there have to be leaders and they have to know where they're going so that we understand our roles. If a leader can't define that role for us, that vision for us, how are they ever going to define our role in achieving that objective? How are we going to all be rowing in that same direction? If we don't know where we're rowing to, we could be rowing like crazy, but we're never going to know whether we achieved or moved that needle for success. And so years ago, when it became frustrating for me, to follow a leader who did not have a vision, I made that decision that I would never do that again. So I agree with you on that one. Finally, Councilmember Gomez, please.
Yes, it's legislation based on never leaving the disenfranchised and marginalized worse off over the interests of the wealthy. Think John Rawls, social utility, social value, transformational leadership, and not transactional leadership.
I'm going to use one word there because there were a lot of good words there. And the word is leaders, really good leaders are inclusive. They don't leave anybody behind, right? Inclusive means you give people a sense of belonging, that they're a part of something bigger than they are. And we have learned in today's world that 40%, for example, of employees in the workforce do not feel like they belong. They can be surrounded by brilliant, capable, talented people with a sense of humor and a great taste in restaurants for lunchtime and so forth, but they can still feel all alone and not a part of it. And the worst part, in the context you stated it, Councilmember Gomez, is they may feel like they don't have a voice, which undermines the great purpose of a democracy like ours that's so constitutionally based. So those are great characteristics. I want that leader who the four of you just described. I want to be that leader. And my question is, are you that leader? Here are some of the common characteristics that we find whenever we do this exercise. This is not an exhaustive list. That list would be too long. Certainly 5 columns more would not be unheard of for the characteristics of an effective leader. Again, there is no universal definition of a leader. Joseph Nye, in his book back in 2008, The Powers to Lead. Joseph Nye is at the Kennedy School of Government. And if he ever watches this Victorville council meeting, I don't want him to think I misquoted him here. I'll just say in his book, The Powers to Lead, he said, when it comes to leaders, right, and it comes to leadership, there's leaders, followers, and context. A couple of examples he gives, and this is where we find ourselves now, and this is relevant to us here in Victorville right now. When the context changes, different leaders emerge. We have a bit of a dysfunctional discharge of our duties as a governance team right now, and we need leaders to emerge. Hopefully that will be all 4 of you who emerge in this context. His examples are Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill did not become Winston Churchill until World War II. He was a well-known legacy, right? That aristocracy name of Churchill. Everybody asked, do I have Churchill blood? So he was well-known and an excellent speaker. But until the Axis powers threatened Mother England and the Allied powers, Winston Churchill was not Winston Churchill. It was when they were threatening Mother England and people were pushing Churchill to make a deal with Hitler that he pounds his fist on the podium and says, on the table, and he says, we will never give up, never. And the rest is history. We can all quote Winston Churchill, right? The context changed, and therefore he emerged as the leader that the world needed in that moment. Now, you don't have to agree with all his decisions on how he went about it. If you've seen the movie Dunkirk, I understand. But you can agree that when the context changes, different leaders will emerge. Here, when you're a council of 4 out of potentially 5 members, we really need all of you to look at this context and ask yourself first, what is in the best interest of the city of Victorville as we seek to discharge the duty that they have given to us as a governance team? And I believe the answer by the time we're done will be that to engage as a governance team. You can question things, you can seek insight, you can challenge the status quo, but it must be done in a way that doesn't undermine the effective governance of a great city like Victorville. And I don't just say that, it is a great city. Tremendous opportunity, tremendous families, good socioeconomic condition for so many. And that's why you've grown as much as you have, I think. It's a good opportunity for young families and others. So when we talk about that leader, did we just describe you? That's really the question, isn't it? And if not, where are you deficient? Where do we need to add characteristics? I didn't say that looking strictly at Councilmember Becerra when I said, where are you deficient? She said, I know Councilmember Becerra because we go back to her time when she was an employee of the great city of Victorville. So leaders versus leadership. While there is no universal definition of a leader, there is an almost, planetary universal definition of leadership. Okay, this one crosses boundaries. I consult in south of the border and in the great País of Mexico and other places that speak Spanish. And I will tell you, this carries over to Latin American countries. I've never done any work in Africa or Asia, so I'm not sure this is their definition, but it's pretty close to being universal, and here it is. The ability to provide a common or shared objective, then motivating a group to achieve that objective. Our mayor shared that earlier when I asked her the quality in a leader that she saw. This is exactly what she was saying. The ability to provide a common or shared objective, and then motivating a group to achieve that objective. Our objective, remove those 3 flagpoles. Your role is this, your role is this, your role is this. Your job over here, you're bringing in the 3 new flagpoles, the bigger, shinier ones with the bigger flags. Everybody understand their role? Okay, let's get to it. We got to get it done in 30 minutes. Providing a common or shared objective and then motivating a group to achieve that objective. Different leaders emerge in different contexts. You've had some great leaders as employees of the city who I've had the privilege of working with over the years. I've seen them set objectives. Where do they get those objectives? It's you. It's you. It has to be you. When you talk about vision, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, that has to be this governance team. If not you, then who? So the city of Victorville needs your leadership now more than ever in what you do, right? So let's talk about the context for that leadership. The context of leadership for the city of Victorville, City Council specifically, I want to get to that. This is my favorite piece of legislation, and I think Councilmember Gomez will love this piece too. It's in the Brown Act, it's in the preamble. It says public commissions, boards, councils, and other legislative bodies of local government agencies exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. The people do not yield their sovereignty to the bodies that serve them. The people insist on remaining informed to retain control over the legislative bodies they have created. Right? These are the people. These are the people. The people on that camera, right, who are watching us, they are the people. You get up here, and whether it's a road, a jammed up road from Adelanto that gets you here breathless, you want your voice to be heard. It's also a little nerve-wracking, right? When you get up here and you know people are watching. I noticed the back of my head, hair seemed a little thinning back there. That adds to the concern. But this is it. This is it. So proud to be a part of you on this night, because this is what it's all about, that last line. The people insist on remaining informed to retain control over the legislative bodies they have created. So let's talk about that. Our good city attorney shared with us earlier a couple of references to the Brown Act in connection with what a person can speak on during public comments, in connection with whether or not we complied with posting notices. The Brown Act was passed, and he's 100% accurate to know that. Brown Act forward and backward, because it is the Brown Act that provides that transparency, that doesn't allow us to sit in a back room, right, under the cover of darkness and make deals. The Brown Act is why we require notices for meetings, what we're going to be talking about, what the decisions are, if there's an action item or if it's just for informational purposes. It requires public voting, no secret ballots. All of that is how we define transparency. Now, the challenge with transparency, and I use that word and I emphasize that word because in the hours and hours of your meetings that I watched, I noticed the question kept coming up about transparency. And I must share with you, the structure of the Brown Act suggests to me, and you complying with it, that you are a very, very transparent group. The challenge with local governments and local decisions is that the decisions you make are on complicated information and data that you have to spend a lot of time looking at on your own. When you get those staff reports from members, from employees of the city, and they're talking about these nuances, right, in these assessments or anything else that we're doing, a change in those rates that we are discussing, whatever the situation is, it is all there. It's all there. Some people I've seen say, okay, what's there, but I don't quite understand it. That is where the personal citizenship of individuals has to come into play. And I know that's something that I got from my parents in my own personal paradigm, right? My parents are immigrants. I'm first generation, right, in this country. And my parents did not suggest to me that anybody should be responsible for my participation in local government, but that I needed to do that for myself. As such, when I see you operating as a board of trustees for the library, you do that, right, as a Victorville City Council? That warms my heart. I was on a library board of trustees for the city of El Segundo years ago. I was on a school board, elected and appointed. That's where it's at. We have to take responsibilities. The apathy must go away and we must take ownership if we want to know more. The information upon which you are making those decisions is there. It's up to us. Now, if we feel there's members of the community that are a bit disconnected, marginalized, disenfranchised, and need to know more, well, then perhaps we could get some community activists to take charge of that. Truly. Do it in Espanol, do it in English, do it in Farsi, do it in any language where we have a population. We have a large Hmong population up in the Sacramento area, right? And we want to keep them informed. We form a group, right? As citizens, volunteers, to ensure that people understand what's happening. We, the citizens behind me now, adding to their burden of responsibility, have to take ownership of that. So long as we are complying with the Ralph M. Brown Act in how we make decisions, then we are being transparent. Is there any question about that? I want to open that up to questions or concerns that you have. Please.
Yeah, I do. In terms of the Ralph Act and closed session items, that's really important because there's no videotaping. So I was wondering what coverage is in there.
Yeah, the Brown Act provides some specific exceptions or exemptions to what doesn't have to be done in public, and they're done with rational thought. For example, pending litigation, right? Pending litigation, if we discussed it here openly, how we were going to handle as a city with our defense counsel, our city attorney there, how we were going to handle the next phases of this litigation and what we were prepared to offer or not offer, or what our strategy was going to be, who would be on the front row, right? It would be plaintiff's counsel, am I correct? Listening to everything we had to say. So they had to put in a litigation exception in the Brown Act. So that's a closed session thing. It's in the people's interests, right? The people insist on remaining informed, but they also say it's okay to not put them in a compromising position to lose the sacred almighty tax dollar. And likewise, when it comes to things like negotiations for real property, because we're looking at expanding or purchasing, people tend to take advantage of that and sort of start buying up properties when they know we're interested and in turn try to turn and make a profit, those types of things. So those can be done. But probably the biggest one, I think relevant to our discussions here that impacts the city council is personnel matters, because you have so many employees, right? Personnel matters are private, sacred almost in California. The only thing more sacred in California is medical information. Medical information is so private that you cannot even put it in an employee's personnel file. We have to have a separate file, separate from the regular personnel file, if we ever have to get medical information collected and for family medical leave, California Family Rights Act leave, or anything else. So personnel matters can be discussed and must be discussed in closed session as well. There's a reason for that. I didn't put this in the slide, but I wanted to have it handy for all of you, and I'll share it with you. It's Article 1, Declaration of Rights, Section 1 of the California Constitution. It's short. It says, all people are by nature free and independent and have inalienable rights. Among these are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and privacy. That is expressly stated in California's Constitution. That's significant because the United States Constitution does not expressly state a right of privacy. It's implied in the First, the Third, the Fourth, and some say the Ninth Amendments to the United States Constitution, but it is not expressly stated. You are bound by the California Constitution and its right of privacy. So one of the exceptions for sure to closed session, to finish answering Councilmember Gomez's question, is private personnel matters. Those cannot be discussed in any way, shape, or form, right? In an open session type of thing. Any other questions that you have? So that's why we have the Brown Act, transparency, transparency, transparency. All right, so pressing forward, and I hate to leave my poetic legislation there, but it is a thing of beauty. And we could put it up on our walls. It's that good, right? The people do not yield their sovereignty to the bodies that serve them. You
So-
represent the people, right?
Just one comment if I could. So I'm a little bit of a policy and procedure nut. I'm sure you've already gathered that. But, you know, I also look at the Brown Act as an instrument that really helps us stay on task. And, you know, when it comes to closed session items, just because something is an uncomfortable subject does not mean it meets the exception criteria for meeting in closed session. So everything is understood, correct me if I'm wrong, to be on the public and open agenda unless it meets a specific criteria delineated in the Brown Act under which we can meet in closed session. Is my understanding correct on that?
That is correct. There are specific exceptions. And the job of you as a governance team is not to find ways to get things into closed session.
Right.
It's only to move things into closed session when the law requires you to do so. And I do know that you have an excellent city attorney. I'm not on his payroll, who when he and I discussing the Brown Act and this particular session understands it very well and directs this council accordingly, right? When asked on these subjects. So yes.
So,
Madam
and then
Mayor,
when
that is
there's a question, the error is always on the side of being in the open session.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. That is correct. Much like, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do. This body also takes primary course of using Rosenberg rules, which sometimes can be very convoluted, and it creates a conundrum for many of us, particularly myself, because when we kind of toggle in a fulcrum, which one are we going to take? Is it Brown Act today? Is it Rosenberg's tomorrow? And that really creates a lot of confusion. And so I'm not 100% sure which one when and which one's advantageous at that particular circumstance.
The two are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist simultaneously and be implemented simultaneously. Rules such as the ones you described, Robert's Rules of Orders or any other, are designed to create the parameters and the structure for discussion, right? The Brown Act is designed to ensure that we are transparent and complying with the law, whether we could do it in closed session or open session. So they really address two different things. One, the parameters and structure for discussion, and the other, where we discuss it, really. That's basically it. So continuing on, these four areas are the ones that you probably learned, Madam Mayor, when you talked about a session you did back in February. These are the foundational four areas that a governance team is focused on right here. Your job is to be that person that the Mayor Pro Tem wants you to be, a visionary governance team, not individually, right? You can be individuals behind, a strategic planning session or other things, but when you make a decision, it is a collective decision and you govern to achieve that end. So you set direction for the city. Where's the city of Victorville going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Are you laying the foundation for us, for the next elected leaders to build upon your successes? Or you are just poor placeholders reacting to situations as they happen? That's a question you need to answer for yourself, right? Because you know you best and you know the context best. Vision, what is our vision? If the employees of the great city of Victorville were asked, hey, what's the vision of the city? What are you trying to achieve in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Can they answer that question? Do they have what we would call an elevator speech ready because they've internalized the vision of this leadership team? That's what we need to get to. Policies and procedures, you adopt them. You set the framework and the structure for how the city is governed. You set the framework for how people are treated by adopting policies like prohibitions against discrimination, prohibitions against self-dealing and ethical components, right? The law comes into play and it drives your decision-making and drafting and creating and adopting those policies by vote, but you create those in your role. Communicate. Your job is to be the face of Victorville and be out in the community and sharing what that vision is and what the expectations are. Here's what you can expect from us as a leadership team in Victorville. You have a role out there. People want to see that. The one thing that I know more than anything with every city client that I have, and they can be so different, 8,000 people in a city, 120,000 people or 1 million people. People are yearning for leadership. They need a common or shared objective, and they need you to help drive that. They need you. Sometimes they don't even know it, right? But they do. It's what's missing in so many ways. And they will know they have real leadership when you're communicating that shared vision to the general population. But you can't do that until you have that vision, right? And you need to make the time to ensure that you have that updated for this governance team to adopt. Sometimes we carry on with previous objectives, but I would suggest to you, you don't have time to not create the time to have that shared objective. Finally, once you have those things down, your job is to hire who you believe would be an effective city manager to be the boots on the ground and discharge that vision that you collectively have to attract and retain an effective leader. And there are tremendous people in that role. It's an interesting dynamic. Won't go too much into it because it'll make Mr. Metzler question, his own career choice in this moment, because it can be a very, very challenging career where after one election, you are unceremoniously put to the curb and then welcomed as a savior at the next city, right, a month later. And so there you go. Tough job. You got good shoulders, Keith. All right,
So can I just say something on
Yes,
that?
please,
Right.
please.
So I previously worked on I was a trustee on a school board for 8 years. So, I think that anyone that sits in that seat as CEO, general manager, it's a world unto itself, because who has one boss with 5 heads, right? I mean, it's no easy task. And so hats off to anybody that sits in that seat.
That is a perfect segue, Madam Mayor, into these next few slides.
Oh,
right here.
hey.
Perfect segue. It's like I planted you there. Thank you for that. So let's talk about, when I said earlier, I don't like that term staying in your lane. It's okay here in this context. You created the lane, okay? Someone, your predecessors, drafted and adopted this municipal code. Sorry, I'll stay close to the mic for those on the Zoom meeting here. For example, this one right here, 2.04.010. The Office of the City Manager is created and established pursuant to the provisions of Section 34851 at SEC of the Government Code. The city manager shall be appointed by the City Council and shall hold office at the will and pleasure of the City Council. This goes back to, looks like the most recent version of it, 1999, right? I don't know if Andre was here back then, but there we go. Continuing on with this municipal code, the city manager shall be the administrative head of government of the city under the direction and control of the City Council, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. So you are the leaders, right? The buck stops with you four, but the work you do is going through this individual who's in the role of city manager. He shall be responsible for the efficient administration of all the affairs of the city, which are under his control. In addition to his general powers as administrative head, and not as a limitation thereon, it shall be his duty and he shall have the power set forth in the following sections. We're not going to go through all of them, but we'll just get a couple more slides on this subject. You might want to look at a pronoun update on your municipal code, just throwing that out there for reference. Victorville Municipal Code, right? Authority over employees. It shall be the duty of the city manager, and he shall have the authority to control, order, and give directions to all heads of departments and to subordinate officers and employees of the city under his jurisdiction through their department heads. All right, so far, have you heard me read anything that suggests any of you has the power authority to get involved in personnel issues, supervising personnel, directing personnel in any way, shape, or form, other than the city manager? You absolutely have the authority, right? And it says even that previous one, right? In this one, no, previous one. The city manager shall, the city council, under the direction and control of the city council, right? So you direct whoever's in the role of city manager. That's it. That's your lane. That's your scope, right? You may think to yourself, well, hey, I'm not really directing them, but I am disappointed, very disappointed with how this public works team is working in this particular segment of our city. And so I'm going to go on my social media and I'm going to criticize that particular group, that type of thing. Then you really do start to run afoul of two things. One, your own municipal code. You're violating your own laws, right? And two, the right of privacy. If you're discussing in a role that you're in, the performance of employees of the city of Victorville, where you are the ultimate authority, right? That's very problematic, very problematic. I want you to stay safe. I'm going to get to why in a minute. I want you to stay safe. So avoid anything along those lines. So lastly, on the city manager, I think it's the last one. Oh, there was one more. It shall be the duty of the city manager to, and he shall appoint, remove, promote, and demote any and all subordinate appointive officers and employees of the city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to read the rest of that. Okay, so that's what this council has given to the city manager. And finally, it shall be the duty of the city manager to make investigations into the affairs of the cities and any departments or divisions thereof. Again, you decided that a long time ago, your predecessors, and this one looks like it hasn't been updated probably since 1968 because it's still good, still good law. And I think that you're well suited to keep that structure that you have. The city's done a good job of formalizing and laying the foundation. Your predecessors did a good job of saying, hey, we need to adopt a municipal code. We may be a small city back when they did this, but we're going to be a big city one day if we have anything to say about it. And they created this structure, and lo and behold, right here you are to that end. So your safe space, your safe harbor is when you operate through the city manager. When you have something to say, you say it as a collective, not an individual, right? You are a governance team to that end. The city council and its members shall deal with the administrative services of the city only through the city manager. Could that be written any more clearly by your predecessors? Anybody have an issue or a concern they'd like to bring up now? Because there's otherwise no reason or excuse for us to violate our own municipal code. Any questions or concerns about that statement? The city council and its members shall deal with the administrative services of the city only through the city manager.
Would you direct me to the page where the words that you just uttered are? I'm probably on section 2.04.100.
Keep going to 2.04.210. So keep going a few slides. You'll see it right there. It's the subheader there is council manager relations in italics. Pausing for a moment to see if anybody has anything they'd like to ask or comment on.
When you said except, there's an exception.
Yes.
Would you elaborate on that exception?
Sure, I'll read it first. Except for the purpose of inquiry, and neither the city council nor any member thereof shall give orders to any subordinates of the city manager. For example, today you asked questions of our city engineer. Did I get the person right who came up? Very nice gentleman who spoke and responded to questions. That's okay. It's okay to do that. If you have a question of somebody you see, a public works supervisor, and they're doing something so-and-so, and you say, you run into them in the community and say, hey, what's going on there? Are they da-da-da-da? Oh yeah, no, they're just getting ready for the parade. That's great. But then you cannot proceed to say, okay, well, I don't want those cans there. I want you to get your team to move them over here. You cannot direct their work in any way. You can make inquiries, right?
Yeah, so I do have probably a comment question. Do you realize that in theory, this sounds beautiful, but in practicum, this is not what is being practiced currently in the city of Victorville. In theory, I'm doing my doctoral degree, public administration. It sounds gorgeous. That's why I asked you to elaborate on the exception, because I wish everything that you were telling me, I'm witnessing, but I'm not. I am experiencing, but I am not. So I appreciate the fact that you're bringing up the municipal code, Because in theory, it sounds like it's working, but in practice, again, and in experience, personal experience as a council member, it is not working. And I don't understand why, because it's right here, black and white, I think it's clear, but interpretation, semantics, collocation, a lot of the linguistic terminology is reinterpreted and it's not practiced as stated
I
forth.
can't speak to any of those issues because I don't have any facts, you know,
Right.
that you're referring to, and I don't think you want to share any facts.
No, I'm not. I just
So-
wanted to bring that to the
Yeah, no, I
attention.
understand that. And does every city who has this municipal code, because this is not unique to Victorville, a lot of folks adopt from a model municipal code, that sort of thing. The reality is perfection is not required for local government service, right? People make mistakes. Every one of you, right, can admit to a mistake that's been made in your best effort to discharge your duties and responsibilities. The focus here, though, in order for us to not to reach a level of frustration that will drive us crazy and the residents of Victorville crazy, the focus here is not to focus on others, right? Councilmember Becerra, you shouldn't be focused on what the mayor's not complying with. And the mayor, you shouldn't be focused on what our vice mayor is not doing, and vice mayor to Councilmember Gomez, right? What we need to focus on is, are we complying? Are we staying in this lane? The great John Wooden said it best. And those of you in Southern California know the great John Wooden better than most. When I quote him in other parts of the country, sometimes I do have to remind people, but usually it's younger people, who John Wooden was, the great Purdue graduate who coached UCLA to 10 national championships. I'm a bit of a UCLA homer. So John Wooden said it this way: do not let the things you cannot do interfere with the things you can do. Do not let the things you cannot do. So none of you has the ability to change each other. You are who you are. You come to this, with well intentions, with the best intentions to serve the people, to be that representative, to know that the people don't yield their sovereignty to you. And if somebody else isn't doing it right, those things can be addressed as a governance team and should be addressed. There's mechanisms for doing that when somebody really gets out of line on a number of things. But in the end, all you can do is control you. Change is a hard thing. And I don't want any of you to think, I'm gonna look at my clock here real quick and say, it's 6:24 on August the 10th, 2021. We can't even change 5 minutes ago, let alone the last 6 months, the last 5 years, whatever period of time you want to put out there. But we can change how we conduct ourselves going forward. One of the ways you're going to do that is, you take responsibility for you as a council member staying in compliance with our own law at this municipal level and doing the things that need to be done in a way where if nobody's around, you're never going to get caught because no one's there to see it, but you choose to comply with the law anyway. When years ago, I'd go to a offsite conference called the California School Boards Association. Some of you around may be familiar with that. It's in San Diego most of the time, if not all the time. And we were there and we'd go to dinner with my fellow Board of Trustees members for our K through 8 district. And I started to bring something up that I learned in a session. And I said, hey, this is really good because next year we're going to be talking about, and this other trustee would say just really loud, like an echoing parrot, Brown Act, Brown Act. And I'd like, would you not do that? That is obnoxious. He was the late, great Alan Wilcox. I'll give you his name because he's an admirable man who passed away way too young. And he would say, Brown Act, like a parrot, right? And at first I was annoyed. And then I realized that man is my greatest safety net I'll ever have. Because if a quorum is gathered together, right, we cannot be discussing business before our governance team, according to the Brown Act, or we would be in violation, right? And so I loved having him there. But in moments like that, it's okay to be responsible for each other. But as for the rest of it, living these laws, being in your lane, that is entirely up to you and focus on you. It's the only person you can change. So that's my response, Councilmember Gomez, to this idea that, hey, we're not perfect at this. If we're not, let's stop whatever we're doing and start being perfect at it from here forward. All of us, let's start being better at it. We can't change the past, but we can change here forward for those of us who want to be, right? So I'm coming to the end. I'm closer to the end anyway. There's a few. But this is what's going to keep you safe. Why do I say that? Because here is your immunity. This is where the four of you should be going, yay, we have immunity, right? And you do. It's in Government Code Section 820.9. Members of city councils, mayors, members of boards of supervisors, members of school boards, members of governing boards of other local public entities, members of locally appointed boards and commissions, and members of locally appointed or elected advisory bodies are not vicariously liable for injuries caused by the act or omission of the public entity or advisory body. When you are in your role, you're in good shape. When you stay on your governance team, I'm going to get to something right here. I'm going to press forward on this. Did I go past? Oh, here it is. I'm going to go back to my other slide in a minute. I want to make sure we understand this. Nothing in this section of 820.9 exonerates an official from liability for injury caused by that individual's own wrongful conduct. Nothing in this section affects the immunity of any other public official. So if one of you, hypothetically, Madam Mayor, I'm going to use you, right, as the leader here, broad shoulders. If you crossed over a line and you got involved in something you should not have, and it created liability for the city, one, you've breached the trust of the public in the city of Victorville. They would not have voted for you had they known your intent was to cost them thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars in settling a case, right? So there's a breach there somewhere, an implied breach. The other part of that is, once you step out of your role as a governance team member, you are individually liable. You can be. Let me strike that, rephrase mine. You can be individually liable. So let's back up for a minute, give you the bigger picture here. As a city, right, you have a pool, a joint powers authority that you belong to. Is it PERMA for you guys? All right, thank you. Lost my mind for a second. PERMA, the Public Entity Risk Management Authority, which has an amazing staff. They're a great pool. You chose a great pool to belong to protect you in areas like general liability, workers' comp, et cetera. For those who don't know what a pool is, simply stated, back in the 70s, premiums went through the roof. And even then, a smaller city like Victorville was still seen as a deep pocket. And so no insurance company was going to touch you back then. And so we passed emergency legislation and they called it this Joint Powers Authority. You weren't big enough to self-insure back then. You're still not. And so they said, hey, Victorville, why don't you join with Hesperia? Why don't you join with the city of Adelanto? Why don't you join with, and all of you pool your resources based on what an actuary tells you, everyone contributes, and then we cover your losses for one of your trucks brakes failing and it rolling down a hill and damaging a resident's property. That's what it's there for, a pool, because they don't charge the almighty profit on top of what the actuary says. Insurance companies do the same thing. They say, hey, actuary, how much is Victorville going to lose on average, 80% confidence level in this next coming year? Well, they look at your last 7 years to determine that. Say, oh, they need to, you're probably going to lose about 2 million. Okay, so then they tack on another 600,000 for profit and say, hey, your premium's going to be da-da-da-da-da, right? Whatever that would be. Pools don't do that. That's why they're effective. That's why you stay in them. And if you don't use up all the money in a program year in a pool, you get it back. Usually it's just contributed to the next year, but you get it back. They're great instruments for local governments like yours to act like a big city like LA, Oakland, San Francisco, and self-insure. Well, you belong to another pool called IRMA, the Employment Risk Management Authority. IRMA was the first pool of its kind. It's created solely for the coverage of employment practice liability, EPL, wrongful termination, sexual harassment, discrimination, retaliation, whistleblowing, wage and hour claims. I know all this because I was one of the first litigation managers for IRMA back in the day. It was started in 1999. We had some groups from out east, Columbia Law School, come and visit and say, hey, how can you have a one-line pool? How can you have such a narrow pool? Because we had good members like Victorville. My point in telling you this, that's who's going to cover if an issue ever comes up from an employee that one of you has violated their privacy rights. IRMA's going to come in and say, okay, well, what's this employment claim, right? And they will cover the city, they will cover the defense costs. But if you're found to be individually liable, they will not cover you. This is the scared straight moment of my presentation. They will not cover you. because you are outside the course and scope of your governance team role. You will have to submit that to your homeowner's policy, your umbrella policy, or somebody else. If you don't have that, you're on your own, right? And so understand that IRMA, the Employment Risk Management Authority, one of the greatest pools I think ever created for this purpose, and run extremely well by a great staff, separate from PERMA, all these acronyms, right? They will not cover individual acts, deliberate, intentional acts that violate, go beyond your immunities. Yes.
Where does this come into play?
I'm sorry?
Where does that come into play?
The-
Phones, cameras.
Oh, phones and cameras?
Recording, everything.
Well, phones are like any other instrument. They can be used for good or evil, right? In the context. If somebody violates somebody's right of privacy using that, and that's a question of law, right? That's not a question for me to decide based on any unknown facts. If somebody's use of a phone reaches the level where it triggers some violation of law for an employee or something else, then it might come to the city as a claim. It might not. I don't know. So I need a lot more facts than that. But there's a lot of issues that could come into play. It just depends. I'm going to give the lawyer answer. Okay, it depends on so much. Anyway, that was the scared straight portion to say, stay safe, stay safe, stay safe, stay safe, which means stay together. In your case, get together. You can be different and still be a team. You can. You absolutely can be different. I've yet to meet a council that were all exactly alike. There's some pretty close ones up in small towns in Northern California, but otherwise, very diverse group with different paradigms, ideas about how things go. So here's the areas that you need to be concerned about specifically. Any actions toward any individual employees, and then invasions of privacy, right? So if you start participating in actions governing, directing employees, that sort of thing, very problematic. Why? Because it's clearly outside your own law, your own municipal code, and outside the scope of then what you would be covered for in those immunities. What can that look like? Well, we had a council member years ago in a city not far from here who decided they did not care for a mid-level, senior level supervisor in public works. And they made it their personal mission to get that person removed from the city, right? There's enough evidence to support that component of it. And that employee filed a claim. And in the end, it was an indefensible claim because the evidence was so strong that this council member got this in their minds that they wanted to eliminate this employee and thought that their role in city council gave them a certain level of privilege. They threw their weight around, right? That authority. If you go back to your every 2-year ethics training, right? They remind you, don't use your authority in such a way that you are seeking privilege from it or any other aspect that's outside the scope of what your real authority is. Don't use the color of authority to get further in line at Starbucks. Don't use the color of authority to try to get into a specific governmental location. Don't use that you otherwise don't have authority for, right? So this person believed that they had carte blanche essentially and decided they were going to let this person know. They told them directly. They promptly told their director of public works, who told the city manager. City manager and the ACM, assistant city manager, met with that council member and demanded that they cease and desist, along with the city attorney, demanded that they cease and desist. They did not. The council did what they could to censure the individual, et cetera, but it ended up in a claim. And there would be definite individual liability for this particular council member in those situations. So don't do that. Don't get involved in the day-to-day personnel matters of the city. And finally, on the privacy side, let's be clear about what that is. I said it earlier, California Constitution says we have a right of privacy. And we do. You do also, by the way, the four of you. It's hard to think that that is the case when you are a public official, right? That you have any privacy, but you do. And as it pertains to your privacy in your place of employment, your own personal medical information, those are sacred areas, private, absolutely private, not entitled for public consumption typically. And so be aware, when we start talking about the performance of our dog catcher. Thinking of a case way up north on the Oregon border. When council members start talking about how incompetent the dog catcher is at their performance, at doing their jobs, et cetera, it's problematic. That is an invasion of privacy because the courts are very clear. Okay, I want to be clear about this with you. The courts are very clear. Employee performance, facts related to an employee discharging their duties and responsibilities fall squarely in the privacy area that's protected by the California Constitution. Is there any question about that?
Yeah, I have one. So I know that there's several employees in the city of Victorville, and I represent a lot of community members in the city of Victorville. And the issue comes when community members feel targeted by specific individuals and they feel fearful and intimidated. So what is the protection of community members who are cited consistently as a way to target them for aligning themselves to a specific member or whatever that may be?
That's a great question, Councilmember Gomez. Anytime we have people abusing their authority or in some way exercising, there's a lack of uniformity and consistency on how they apply laws, procedures, et cetera, it's very problematic. And if we hurt one person, it hurts all of us. We compromise our own constitution when we do that and our own integrity as a society, in my opinion. That's me projecting my paradigm for a moment. In your role as a governance team, it's your job to be a voice out there and encourage your people to exercise their rights. It is never your job, and I want to underline never, bold never, and do everything I can with 72-point font. It is never your job as a governance team member to discuss, besmirch, disparage the performance of employees of the city of Victorville out in public or in any other context other than closed session. And in closed session, you're allowed to talk about a few individuals. I didn't go all the way through all of your municipal code, but many cities can talk about, right, the city manager. Some can talk about the city attorney and the police chief at times, right, where a variety of situations. And people at that level, fire chief, just depends. It usually ends there. But the reality is, those are in closed session. When we find ourselves in the public arena, whether that is physically out there or in a pandemic situation on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, if that's still around, right, TikTok or anything else. When we find ourselves through social media disparaging employees of this city, especially when the facts or a trier of fact hasn't reached any conclusions to that end, we are squarely in the middle of the problem. We're squarely in the middle of the problem and outside our role as a governance team member. Not a popular answer, Councilmember Gomez, but clearly one that's going to keep you safe and protect you, right, by not casting aspersions or anything else out there.
Right, and all that is always an interpretation in the courtroom of what it was and how the narrative can be twisted one way or twisted the other. So I totally understand the semantics and the logistics that goes with that. I appreciate your response.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I just want the four of you to be the best version of you can be, and I believe that it's possible. Together. I think individually you all believe it's true, but I think you wonder whether you can do it together. And the answer is you can, but there has to be the ability to modify your paradigm at times. I'm getting near the end of my thing. I know I said that earlier, but we had some questions.
You just said something very interesting to me, be willing to modify your paradigm, right?
Yes,
And I think that holds true for us as individual council members, right?
correct.
Because we all come to the table with different life experiences, perspectives, skill sets, experience, and what have you. And we all get to bring that to the table, right? So I can sit here and speak for several minutes at least on the virtues of my colleagues here. I can. And I can also talk about how I need each of them because they have something to contribute that helps me where I think I might be lacking, right? But I also know that sometimes, for just a general example, I think we all care about our community. we all want to connect heart to heart, person to person with the members of our community. That's why we ran. I'm very confident in that for every one of my colleagues. But you have to be able to go beyond that. Caring is not enough. You have to be able to apply yourself to the work before you and train yourself for the work before you. It's hard work. And I think the people expect us to have a level of professionalism and competence. So we might come into the office with a certain mindset, but we have to be willing to flex and change and say, well, maybe everything I thought beforehand isn't really the way it ought to be done, or the way it really works best for a city organization, the way it really works best to get things done for the people of our community. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And what you're saying is we have 4 paradigms. At some point, we'll have 5 paradigms. When I use the word paradigm, I'm merely referring to a lens to the world. Everything that happened to the 4 of you before you sat in those chairs for this meeting impacted your paradigm. Where you grew up, how you grew up, your amount of time in service, right? Elected and re-elected, right? All of these things impact how you see the world, where you grew up, how you grew up. My wife and I often compare these notes. This past Friday, we celebrated our 33rd wedding anniversary. Had to get the number right. And the key part here, we decided of what has managed to keep us together is our commitment to continuous improvement, and that we don't project our paradigms onto one another. And for all of you, you have great paradigms. At least the city of Victorville and its residents and voters think you do, or you wouldn't be there. And so here's the point though. There are 8 billion paradigms on planet Earth. 8 billion. When we pass 1.9 trillion, infrastructure packages, we lose track of what a billion really is, right? If I gave you 100,000 a day and said, hey, spend it, and I'll give you another 100,000 tomorrow, how long would it take you to spend 1 billion? You could say 10,000 days, you math geeks out there, I appreciate that. But the number in months or years, 100,000 a day. First of all, could you spend it? If I gave it to you, I think you could, especially in California. So it would take you over 27 years to spend $1 billion at 100,000 a day. And we get desensitized to that because of $1.9 trillion packages like we heard about today and yesterday. So my point, 8 billion paradigms on planet Earth. Here's 4. Is one of you sitting there thinking that somehow out of 8 billion paradigms, you were anointed queen of the paradigm universe? Anybody? No. Did anyone bring out a sword, Councilmember Becerra, and say, I anoint the queen of the paradigm universe? No, but I've known her long enough to know she acts like it sometimes, right? No. We all do.
She also has that sense of humor that can
She
take
does.
that.
That's why I can say that. But we all do. Whenever we say things like this is us projecting our paradigm. And I think this is your point, Madam Mayor, that we have to be able to drop our paradigms at times and listen, genuinely listen to understand, not listen like lawyers, right? We listen to respond. We listen to rebut. That's our training. We want to listen to understand. It's hard to do with your paradigm up. So sometimes we have to drop it. And I would suggest when you're in meetings together, whether it's meetings like this or other training meetings, closed session, everybody just say, hey, you know what, let's all drop our paradigms and listen to understand one another, not judge one another, dismiss one another, marginalize one another, et cetera. Because none of you are queen of the paradigm universe, not one of you. And so we all have to give and take at times. Compromise in situations does not mean compromising your principles. You can compromise, legislate effectively, and still, right, disagree and move forward and not let the disagreement define you. The city of Victorville, all those watching, right, and those folks here, they demand more from this team, to be a team and to not let the conflict define you. Conflict is not inherently bad. Because of conflict, we made advances in medicine, science, social justice, right? And we're still doing it right now as we look at this Black Lives Matter movement and others, right? That conflict and the way it's being handled, sometimes we don't like it, but it brings about change. But we don't have to let the conflict define us as a people or as a society or as a Victorville City Council. And that's the key. So we all need to be able to drop our paradigm sometimes and listen and modify our paradigms. If there's something in the way from being an effective governance team, ask yourself this question: is this in the best interest of the city of Victorville? Is how we're addressing this? Is what we're addressing? Remember, managers, they manage resources, they manage projects, they manage within parameters. Leaders decide whether those parameters are the right ones. Leaders decide whether we're prioritizing the right things, and that's what we're craving in this instance. So I'm going to press forward.
Okay, so, but I do have to ask a question.
Okay.
I have to. Because will you define for us what a city is? Is it four walls? It is an organization, is it the organization of the city? Is it the people of the city, or is it all of it?
I think the answer technically would be all of it, but my answer is it's the people, right? The people. You represent the people, and they do not yield their sovereignty to you. They demand to be kept informed. And you're doing that by complying with the Brown Act. There's some work that the people have to do. I like the Spanish version, right? Mi pueblo. You know, my people, that's what it's about. So, Madam Mayor, I would suggest to you that the people who you represent have a lot of faith in the four of you. And you can do this. You need to be able to put your pride aside. The number one reason, if we're playing Family Feud, top 5 answers on the board, reasons council members can't get past it, personal pride. How do we define that? You think you have the right paradigm. Just because you see it this way doesn't make it universal truth. It makes it your truth. And there can be truth there, but if I see it differently, it doesn't make me wrong. It makes me different from you, right? And when we make statements to each other or on the dais and we say things like, don't you think you're being too sensitive? Don't you think you're overreacting to this? Don't you think you're making too much of this? Or as Abraham Lincoln said back in the mid-19th century, you ever want to make a person your enemy? Simply tell them they're wrong. This method works every time. He was talking about projecting your paradigm onto somebody else. They didn't even know it, right? But that's what it was. So don't do it.
Well, it's really interesting you would say that, because I've made enemies saying exactly what you've said. I want to go to Sacramento and I want to represent the people, but 3 votes have casted and I'm not going to go paid on taxpayer dollar, which is very unfortunate. So that's how I make enemies in this dais, which is very unfortunate because I thought taxpayer dollars was to train everyone equally if they wanted to desire. And it was my desire, but I'll go on my own dime.
I think that's kind of a paradigm projecting statement though. Because they disagree with you, somehow you think they're wrong.
Right, because they get to go, but I don't. And how can you modify my way of thinking when I cannot go on taxpayer dime, but they 3 can?
Well, I don't know all the facts around that.
Right.
But one thing I do know in connection with your statement, nobody, Councilmember Gomez, can modify your way of thinking except you. You're it, right? The reasons behind it could be legion, right? The one thing that I want you all to stop doing, this wasn't in my presentation, but it's evident that you need to stop doing this with one another, is making negative assumptions about your intents and your motives, because those are not based on facts. Facts may present themselves, but you fill in the gaps. You don't know all things. I don't know what each of you is thinking when you make a decision. I can assume that if you don't agree with me, that you're doing it to spite me, or I could assume we just have different paradigms, right, on the subject, and it's okay to be different. And let's move forward productively, efficiently, and effectively. I saw votes recently in your council meetings on a proposed candidate to the Planning Commission. I believe it didn't go the proposed way that the mayor had, but I thought she handled it graciously and moved on, right? You can't let moments like that define you. Or she could sit there and make negative assumptions about Mayor Pro Tem, who expressed a particular opinion about it, right? And what she thought. That's going to happen all the time in every governance team you'll be on. Quit making negative assumptions about the whys and start focusing on the what we're doing, how we're going to achieve it, and leave the rest of it, all that collateral damage, right? Leave it aside to that end. So here's just a quick slide on maintaining the public trust. You do these things and you have it in front of you, so you can take it, look at it on your own time. I'm not going to go through them just in the interest of time. They're worthwhile. Any public ethics training, every 2 years, we do the AB 1234 training. This is the core of it. There's a lot of statutes that represent these statements, but this is the core of it right here. And then I would point you to do not abuse your position or authority, meaning do not exercise authority in a situation where you really don't have it. That is a challenging situation to put the city in when we do that. And avoiding the appearance of impropriety, be mindful of the fact that you are in the public eye all the time in what you do and what you say. So this city believes in you. They thought your talents and abilities, they thought your paradigm was pretty cool. And they voted you in to the role that you're in now. They believe in you. And you know what? I didn't vote for any of you. And I believe in you. With all my heart, I believe in you. And I believe in what you're doing. And I believe no matter how complicated things get, you're the cream of the crop in an apathetic voting world. You really are. And so stay focused on that and the good you can achieve. Watch your tone with one another. And watching your council meetings, I was concerned about the tone in those emotional situations. 93% of our effective communication is nonverbal when we find ourselves in emotional situations. 38% of that 93 is tone. Avoid all the negative impact tones, right? Which are things like condescending tones or its cousin, patronizing tones. How about accusatory tones? There's no place on the city council in Victorville for accusatory tones. You can maintain your professionalism and still be serious without being accusatory, judgmental, or angry at one another. Watch
I'd like
your
to provide a
tones.
comment. So what do you do when your community provides all those tones to you and you have to come up here and try to be that voice piece that is not easy for the community to come up here, whether they're busy or their timing doesn't work. And you have professed that that voice piece will be heard, whatever language it may be.
Anybody in your situation is going to have your detractors. You all realize that, right? Not everybody likes you. Mayor Pro Tem, you know that, right? Not everybody likes you. And the reality is, Councilmember Gomez, you're going to have people, I heard people on Zoom say things to you that I thought, I wish they would find a different way to express their disappointment if that's what they're feeling. But you'll agree that they're entitled to feel that disappointment because they have their own paradigm, right? And to disagree with your, they're making negative assumptions about your intent or your motives. But one thing you cannot control is them, and the one thing you can control is you. And so years ago, I made the decision that in my golden moments, which is their data input, before my data output is my golden moment. I'm not going to let anyone else choose for me how I'm going to react. It all started with driving on the 10 freeway. Somebody cut me off and I got so angry and I pulled up right behind them as if I was going to do something. And all it did was cause me aggravation and pain and high blood pressure, right? And I thought, what am I doing? I don't even know that 90-year-old woman in the car in front of me, right? I'm sure I could take her, but I don't know her. And I said, never again. I want, if I could, I would impart this to you. I've witnessed it, I've seen it, and it's not nice and it's not fair, Councilmember Gomez. It's not. But don't let them have control of you. You maintain your professionalism. You maintain that high bar for yourself and keep that. And I promise you, in my experience working with local government, it will pay huge dividends for you in the long run that you not give people control of you. Not any member of this council or any member coming across Zoom or anyone who comes to this podium right here. You just smile and say, this is democracy.
I wish I could say that to Laura Marie Mitchell. She's a homeless woman that every week I go by and I sit down. When I look in her eyes, I can never, ever, when I come to this dais, say what you have told me. It's just very impactful. This is a homeless woman for years, has been homeless. How do you do that? and say exactly what you said without using emotion and try to defend her rights.
Yeah.
Jerry, I have a question though.
Let me just comment on that and say that there are a lot of people who are not as blessed as the four of you, right? There are a lot of people more blessed than the four of you. Councilmember Gomez, with all my heart, I want you to keep advocating for homeless people, for people who are struggling. My brother's an ecclesiastical leader out in Norco, which isn't that far from here. And he witnesses families who end their graveyard shift and come in to sleep in the beds that the day shift family is leaving because they share the same apartment, each with 2 kids. 1 bedroom for the 4 kids, and those parents share the same bedroom, right, at different hours of the day. Keep being the voice, but not just you, all of you. And I believe you all are the voice for them. But there's nothing about the driver, there's nothing of our passion, there's nothing about a situation or a fact pattern that you can tell me that's going to cause me to say to you, give them hell, right? Lose your professionalism. Let down your guard and be mean and nasty and try to shout over people. I can't do that because you're going to be most effective when you maintain your professionalism. And I know you can do it. I know you can do it. And your long run is going to be so much more enjoyable by doing that. Don't, I'm going to call you by your first name. Blanca, don't give anyone control over you. You keep it. You keep it. And you will never regret doing the right thing when the right thing is called for. You speak up. You ask questions. Right? There's nothing wrong with the questions you ask, even though others don't ask as many. You want more because you want to try and give people. I see what you're doing. You're trying to give more people transparency than the transparency that's afforded by Ralph M. Brown or anybody else, right? I see that, and that's okay. Just don't let any of that become adversarial. You can ask questions of our city manager. This is for all of you, but it doesn't have to be adversarial. It doesn't have to be us versus them. Let's not make negative assumptions about one another and staff who work so hard. Our city clerk's office to make these meetings run smoothly. Our staff members with their reports. There's nothing about this that has to turn us versus them. And as you align and get on the same side of achieving this, all of you, you will achieve greater results. You're going to achieve a lot more by keeping it there. Anyway, Councilmember Becerra, you were going to say something.
You keep saying 4. When one of us goes out and embarrasses the other 3, how are we supposed to turn a blind eye to that? And you say it's my paradigm. If my paradigm embarrasses this council, then we get embarrassed as a whole.
Yeah.
And you say it's us. We change us, we control us, but we should be a body of 5, we're a body of 4. So we all get embarrassed.
Well, I would submit to you slightly different interpretation of that. And that is that if you are embarrassed, that is a choice. Whatever emotion you experience is a choice you've made between data input and data output. You chose embarrassment. You can choose anger. You can choose frustration. You can choose a lot of things. Now, is it, an emotional trigger at times that someone does something and it triggers the sense of, oh my gosh, what's happened, right? Yeah, that's real. That's real. How you handle it is as important as everything I just said, right? You don't have to choose embarrassment. You can say, hey, how about a positive assumption? Hey, maybe this council member doesn't understand the impact they're having on the people around them. And maybe I can talk to them about it, right? Individually, one-on-one, not violating any Brown Act. It's nothing about the business before this council, just a discussion because you care, right? It's something that can happen. But are there things that are going to fall below the standard of care at times on governance teams? Yeah. I was the person, I'm sure, that embarrassed my board of trustees back in the school board days because my mouth sometimes would run a little faster than my thought process, right? It could happen. And then you apologize, you move on and try to do your best. And I know you can do that. I do. Any other thoughts there? Not. Let's finish up here. The only way that you can truly discharge all that you're trying to do here is by being a member of this team. Let's get to that. Let's leave the past where it belongs, right? Let's be energy efficient human beings. Energy is so finite and a limited resource. Now, at the end of the day, at 7 o'clock, right? You have very little of it. And so I'm done. This is the last slide, really. And I'm telling you right now, with such a finite resource, why use any of it to contemplate the embarrassing thing that happened 6 months ago or a year ago or last week? Let's focus forward. What can we do to change the Victorville City Council going forward? Because that's the only thing you can change, is how you engage with one another. I like this slide. I'm sorry I couldn't find a better picture besides one that says RV parking restricted. But I use this slide with all my cities with a picture of that city where good government and good governance converge. If that is not true, if I have not made a true statement here, then you can fix it. And I would implore you to do so. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council, for allowing me to share with you some information that I hope will benefit all of you and the city of Victorville. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Preciado. Very comprehensive presentation. I think it really helps to have heard this. We did have a governance relations workshop in February, and this certainly piggybacks very nicely on that. And I can only hope that your words sing to our heart and it translates into real life for this council and our community, because that's the great objective, right? That we can do what we need to do for our community. So thank you, sir. All right, with that said, this was an informational piece only, so there's no motion to be had. And since there's no further business before us, our business is concluded. And as a matter of housekeeping, all council members, staff, and audience members will kindly vacate council chambers in City Hall within 10 minutes. That would be 7:13 p.m. so that the facilities may be cleaned and secured, and members of the public are not permitted behind the dais. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.